Mega Pokemon might just be the single most popular added mechanic in recent times. What? X and Y were released over a decade ago? Great. I had no idea it was a rock type, but apparently I'm a fossil now. Anyways, existential dread aside, these really are some of the coolest Pokemon of all time, and with ZA bringing a new set of Megas to the table, I wanted to take a moment to take a look back at the history of Mega Evolutions and every Mega so far. However, if you're looking for the new entries, you'll have to check out our follow-up video after the ZA games are released, so be sure to subscribe and leave a like so that YouTube remembers to remind you when those come out. For now though, before we get into the actual Mega Evolutions, we gotta answer the question, just what is a Mega Evolution and how was it caused? Because while it might seem pretty straightforward, there are a ton of contradictions and confusing elements. Depending on who you ask or where you look, Mega Evolution's origins are completely different. Sycamore explained that Mega Evolution comes from special stones which were transformed by the light of the ultimate weapon which had been fired 3,000 years ago, adding that these stones may have been evolutionary stones, which is why they can cause Mega Evolutions now. That said, he also said it was an evolution method exclusive to Kalos, which is a pretty hot take considering that our next games, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, showed us that it was also present in Hoenn. Despite this, Sycamore's assistant Sina, who we find in Alola, also suggests that it was exclusive to Kalos by saying it is strange to even talk about the phenomenon outside of that region. Yet, when we visit Paldea, we have both the Occulture magazine and the regional Pokedex stating that Roaring Moon resembles Mega Salamence, and that it seems to share a link with that evolution method. Speaking of Salamence, that brings us back to Hoenn once again, where an ancient tribe called the Draconid who worshipped Rayquaza explained things to be different as well. According to their traditions, the phenomenon began not in Kalos, but with Rayquaza and the countless meteors that struck Hoenn in the past. During the Primal Era, when disaster ravaged the region, showers of radiant meteorites crashed into Meteor Falls. These stones glowed with a rainbow light that is reminiscent of modern keystones, and it drew the attention of Rayquaza. Descending from the heavens, it ended the chaos and restored balance to the region before disappearing once again. Roughly 1,000 years after those events, another calamity struck Hoenn. A colossal meteorite of dazzling light plummeted into the ocean, creating the basin that would one day become Sootopolis City. The impact released vast stores of natural energy, awakening Groudon and Kyogre, who once again began to fight. The Draconids explained that the people prayed for Rayquaza's return, and when the legendary Pokemon arrived, their cries for salvation caused it to transform. Rayquaza achieved Mega Evolution, and with its newfound power, subdued both Groudon and Kyogre once again. From this, the Draconids assert that Rayquaza was the first Pokemon to Mega Evolve. However, Kalos tells us a different story. Legends from the Tower of Mastery claim that long ago, a trainer and their Lucario discovered two unusual stones, leading to what is remembered as the world's first recorded Mega Evolution. As I said, it is pretty sloppy and inconsistent, but what is clear is that any Pokemon who Mega Evolves becomes significantly stronger. Professor Cosmo notes that the process releases an immense surge of infinity energy, while Lysander adds that Sycamore thinks the energy is a Pokemon's full hidden potential, which is normally unattainable through regular evolution, represented by a 100 stat bump in-game, though those stats never affect the Pokemon's HP. Ultimately, Mr. Stone reveals that infinity energy, the same force used to power the ultimate weapon and which enables Mega Evolution, is derived from the very life force of Pokemon. But despite these theories, the true nature of Megastones and Keystones remains to be unknown. Stephen Stone admits that their origins are mysterious, but events during the Delta episode demonstrate that the meteorite contains latent energy capable of transforming into either type of stone. The meteorite given to the player in Hoenn gradually transforms over time, ultimately being absorbed by Rayquaza and enabling it to Mega Evolve without needing to hold a stone. Yet, according to Zinnia, even these meteorites eventually lose their power. But with all the background out of the way, let's take a look at the 50 original Mega forms. Starting with Venusaur. When Mega Evolving, the plant on Venusaur's back grows and blooms a second set of leaves above the original. However, this extra weight means that Venusaur needed to develop stronger legs to support its body, which we learn about in the Let's Go Pokedex entries for its Mega form. The majority of this Pokemon's stats that were buffed when Mega evolving are slotted into its defenses, with 40 in physical and 20 in special, while both offenses each get 20 points as well. Equally as important though is how this is represented in Mega Venusaur's ability, Thick Fat. Venusaur being a grass and poison type gives it a solid offensive typing. However, it is very weak to many of the most common attacking types in the game, those being Ice, Fire, and Psychic, as well as Flying, though while it is a great typing, it's definitely more rare than the others in terms of attacks. But this new ability negates the Ice and Fire type weaknesses, meaning you basically just need to dodge Psychic type attacks and an occasional Brave Bird, making this an extremely solid Mega Pokemon in terms of defense. On top of all that, a small pink flower appears on their head and their butt, and 3 small dark patches develop on their face, similar to Bulbasaur and Ivysaur, which is just kind of a fun detail. I always hated that Venusaur loses these spots that are so iconic on their younger forms. I mean, what is Bulbasaur without its spots? Look at this, it's terrible. Moving away from that though, and we can get on to Charizard, a Pokemon who received 2 Mega forms, one for Pokemon X and the other for Pokemon Y. Charizard has always been like an okay Pokemon despite its popularity. It has decent enough stats, but being a fire flying type makes it super frail to both water and electric, which I don't know about you, but every team I've ever used has these types because they cover so much. But more importantly, Stealth Rocks rip through this thing, which is why it is so cool to see it get Megas, which really breathe new life into the Pokemon. Ironically, the version that retained this objectively weaker typing was the one that saw more play by a mile, but we do have to start with Charizard X. This was a weird version of the Pokemon in terms of stats. Firstly, it became a Fire Dragon type, making it only weak to other Dragon type attacks as well as ground and rock, which was sweet because it took neutral damage from the newly added Fairy type that most dragons really struggled with. On top of that, its new ability Tough Claws boosted the power of moves that made contact by 30%, which is pretty significant. However, where it gets iffy was the stat distribution. A massive 46 of the 100 points were put into its attack, which makes sense with that new ability. But then, rather than leaving the special attack alone or even siphoning points from it, 21 points were put into it. And then all remaining points were put into physical defense, while special defense and speed remained untouched. Putting the points that went into special attack into either of the other categories would have done a lot of good to make this Pokemon more effective. But essentially, this meant that while other Megas got 100 points to become stronger, Charizard X really only got about 80. Regardless, this Pokemon is so fun to use. Dragon Dancing on Charizard with a great new typing made them a super powerful Pokemon if you could get a turn to set up. Plus, I mean, look at this thing. The Pokedex explains that so much power flows through it that the orange on its body was replaced by black, while its underbelly, wings, and flames all became blue. Like, honestly, this dude is just sick as hell. And it's a shame that it just didn't get as much time in the spotlight as its counterpart did. But while Charizard X felt like an entirely different Pokemon from how the original Charizard was used, Charizard Y was basically the epitome of what Charizard wanted to be. The horns on its head and the peak of its wings became elongated to look like a crown, and just generally more draconic. It developed small spines on its tails, and its arms look like this for some reason, I guess. This form retains the fire and flying typing, but picks up the drought ability. Objectively, one of the strongest abilities in the game, as it sets up a sunny day and can be used as the core for a sun team. Now, how good is the drought ability? Well, it's so powerful that people will run Torkoal on their teams to get to use it. But instead, they get to use a real and fairly powerful Pokemon with drought this time around instead. Now, despite the Pokedex mentioning how this new form is faster than a fighter jet, Charizard Y doesn't actually pick up any speed stats. Instead, they get the inverse stat boost that Charizard X had: 50 in special attack, 20 in attack, and 30 in special defense, while defense remained untouched along with speed. Now, while I said the points to special attack were a problem with Charizard X, I would say it wasn't nearly as bad a problem for Charizard Y with getting attack. The reason being how Charizard's original stats look. Charizard already wanted to be a special attacker, so it needs less help to do that, while its original attack stat is pretty low, so every point matters when making it a physical attacker. It is the difference between 159 in special attack and 130 in attack between these two Pokemon, despite both of them getting about the same buff. That said, obviously if these points were put into speed or defense in Charizard Y, it would still be infinitely better. It just wasn't as bad or as much of a problem in comparison. Now, on top of all of that, we gotta talk about how Drought actually affects Charizard Y directly as well. Because while it already has a stronger special attack stat, the Sunny Day boost makes all of its fire-type attacks 50% stronger. So while it has a 159 in special attack, it actually feels closer to 225 when using a fire-type attack. Not only that, but the Sunny Day reduces the incoming damage from water-type attacks, meaning that one of its weaknesses is now covered as well. And if that wasn't enough, it also gives it access to one-turn Solar Beams, now making it super effective against the water types, which would have been the answer towards it. So, while it does retain that massive Stealth Rock weakness, it loses its water weakness and actually becomes strong against water Pokemon, making it an all-around threat, along with making it the core to sun-based teams, which is what made it so popular. Finishing off the Kanto starters, we have Blastoise, the only pure-type Pokemon of the trio. Unfortunately, Mega Blastoise is also probably the worst of their Megas, but it's still pretty fun to use and it looks super cool. The two cannons on their back slip down to shells that it grows on the back of its hands, and a massive third cannon grows out of its back as well, with this one being as strong as a tank's cannon. And this is reflected in their new stats, as well as their ability. Mega Blastoise adds 50 points to their special attack, 20 to their defense and attack, and 10 to special defense. And if that now 135 in special attack isn't enough, it also gets buffed by Mega Launcher, which boosts Aura and Pulse moves by 50%, of which Blastoise can learn Aura Sphere, Dark Pulse, Dragon Pulse, and Water Pulse. And that's like, fine, it's cool, but like, so you're gonna use Water Pulse with its new power of 90 when Scald is right there, and the other moves are like, they're fine, I guess. The coverage isn't fantastic, and I mean, it's Blastoise, so you're probably running Rapid Spin and Ice Beam along with Scald, meaning you can pick one of those other three moves. It just feels like a really wasted opportunity, and I get the design, I really like the design, the execution feels kind of weak. It's the perfect example of a Mega I wanted to be good, but which is just too kind of middle of the road to compete with the others. On a very similar note, next up is one of my personal favorite Megas, Mega Beedrill. Off the rip, obviously a Mega for Beedrill isn't going to be on the same level as Megas who aren't for Pokemon who aren't, well, Beedrill. But even so, it is so rad. Its thorax, legs, and arms all transform into long stingers, almost looking like lances, which it will use to repeatedly stab its targets until it can take them out with its main stinger in a final attack. So the nice part is that Beedrill got a massive buff going into Gen 6, a whole 10 points to their attack, which might not seem like a lot, but when a Pokemon's BST is 385, every point counts. Even with the 100-point buff it then got from Mega Evolving, it still had less total stats than the evolutions. And speaking of which, full video explaining all the evolutions if you haven't seen that one, it's pretty good. But even with such low stats, Mega Beedrill is a really interesting case. It's basically the ultimate glass cannon. This is the most hyper-specialized stat change of any Mega Evolution, so much so that they actually dropped Beedrill's special attack all the way down to just 15 to allow them to be optimized more. That puts it at the second lowest special attack stat of any Pokemon, on par with Magikarp and just behind things like Bonsly and Shuckle. But, and this is very important, who cares? It's not going to use the special attack stat, so it would have just been wasted points anyways. And so in its Mega form, Beedrill has a 150 in attack and 145 in speed. Nearly 300 of its 495 points are in just those two categories. Its defense stays at the abysmal total of 40, while its special defense is an okay 80, but this Pokemon basically says, hey, I need to hit them first, and I'm gonna try and take them out all at once. So it doesn't matter how low my defenses are, because if they touch me, I'm gonna fall apart anyways. And I kinda respect that dedication to the cause. And sure, their BST is still only about 500, but think about how most other Pokemon are used. They almost always have one whole stat that is totally wasted with one of their attacks. Unless they're the few Pokemon who can be hybrid attackers. For example, if you got rid of Mega Charizard Y's physical attack, which should almost never come up, they would be fairly similar to Beedrill's base stat total. On top of that, you could use cool attacks like Fell Stinger, because that's what this Pokemon needed. 3 stages of attack boosts whenever it kills an opponent. Actually, that isn't even the half of it, because it also has the ability Adaptability when it Mega Evolves, making its stab bonus ×2 rather than ×1.5. So Bug and Poison type moves are now more effective than they should be on a Pokemon with sky-high physical attack and speed, who can buff their own attack by 3 stages whenever it knocks something out. This thing can be a monster, and I love that so much. Now, like Beedrill, Pidgeot also received a 10-point BST buff going into Generation 6, with theirs being into speed, notably bringing them just over 100. And just like Beedrill, Pidgeot also received a Mega Evolution as well. Their new form develops muscles and grows to the point that it can fly for over 2 weeks without needing to rest. Its wings become larger, its hair, I guess that's hair, changes shape and looks more sharp and fluid, and they get blue accents at the tips of their feathers. This is another interesting Mega that totally reworks how a Pokemon is used. Typically, you can kind of do whatever you want with Pidgeot. I mean, all of their stats are basically the same across the board, with all of the relevant ones being between 70 and 85. But when it Mega Evolves, it finally gets a sense of direction. All of their stats are brought to that baseline of 80, except their speed, which gets another 20 points, and their special attack, which gets a massive 65 points. But what really makes them so unique is their ability No Guard, which makes it so that all attacks will always hit. Notably, this is important because Mega Pidgeot will often act first thanks to their speed, meaning that they can hit their opponent with a guaranteed Hurricane to get a chance to confuse them, and potentially have them hit themselves before inflicting damage to you. Or you could use Heat Wave and potentially burn them first to cut their physical damage. It's a very fun Pokemon to use, it's pretty fast, it can be used very supportively with things like Tailwind, U-Turn, Heat Wave, and Hurricane to kind of mess with your opponent's team, but overall I do kind of feel like it falls into that Blastoise category where it's like, it's fine, you could use it, but there are just so many more interesting and cool options in my opinion. Now, speaking of special attackers, we have a big one up next with Alakazam. Once again, this is another Pokemon who received a buff going into Generation 6, gaining 10 points to its special defense. The Pokedex explains that when Mega Evolving, all of Alakazam's power is converted into psychic energy, leaving it with withered muscles that have no strength left in them. In exchange, it gains the ability to see into the future, so much so that just glancing at someone will reveal their entire life to it from birth to death. In this form, Alakazam demonstrates their heightened psychic abilities by getting more spoons. It has 5 now, isn't that crazy? It also levitates and grows a classic wizard beard, even the fur on its forearms extend to look like sleeves to a robe. When Alakazam Mega Evolves, they gain the ability Trace, allowing them to copy the ability of their opponent, which situationally can be pretty useful or completely useless. Things get a bit weird though from here, as Mega Alakazam is the only Mega Pokemon to not get 100 points when Mega Evolving, instead getting 90, 40 in special attack, 20 in defense, and 30 in speed. What I think happened is that they gave them stats for its pre-buff base stat total. However, in Generation 7 this was corrected, and Mega Alakazam received another 10 points in special defense to bring them up to standard. Interestingly, this makes Alakazam one of, if not the only Pokemon to receive buffs in consecutive generations, which is crazy because, like, Alakazam is not exactly known to be weak. That said, this is one of the first Pokemon on the list to actually become weaker from Mega Evolving. That's because in holding a Mega Stone, Alakazam can't hold other items, like a Focus Sash for example. which when combined with their ability Magic Guard made it one of the few Pokemon who could guarantee to survive a hit by equipping this item without being ruined by rocks, spikes, weathers, or status effects. Meanwhile, while Mega Alakazam can certainly hit harder, it is essentially always going to die in one hit, meaning faster Pokemon will take it out instantly. This is something we see a few times throughout Megas. As it turns out, some Pokemon really rely on items, and so forcing them to hold a Mega Stone can actually be a drawback despite giving them extra stats. Now onto one of my favorites, the ultimate defensive Mega in my opinion, Slowbro. In general, the original Slowbro is actually pretty solid, with the Regenerator ability allowing it to be a really difficult Pokemon to deal with. God, it's so fun to use. But interestingly, when exposed to a Mega Stone, Slowbro isn't the one who actually experiences the changes. Instead, the Shelder on its tail is mutated and forced to grow to the point that it swallows the Slowbro whole, becoming a protective suit of armor and turning Slowbro into a big ol' Beyblade. On top of that, Shelder's digestive fluids wake the Slowbro up and give it motivation and strength to deal with any battle. When Mega Evolving, Slowbro gets 70 points to its defense and 30 to special attack, which is absolutely nuts. But more importantly, its new ability, Shell Armor, makes it so that it can't be crit. Crits are important in Pokemon as they allow Pokemon to bypass defensive stat changes to take tanks out. But that's no longer an option with Mega Slowbro, meaning that if it sets up, it can be nearly impossible to actually kill. Throw on a Sleep Talk set with Calm Mind and Scald, and suddenly you are a war criminal holding your opponent hostage. What a fantastic Pokemon. But back to more offensive Pokemon, and we can look at Mega Gengar. This Pokemon actually originally lost an immunity when Mega Evolving because it loses the Levitate ability. Though, in Gen 7, Gengar already loses this ability anyways, so it's not that big a change after that point. In exchange, Gengar picks up Shadow Tag, meaning your opponent can't swap out when it enters the field, allowing Gengar to swoop in and take out threats at a moment's notice, which is pretty easy to do, as it gets 40 points to special attack and 20 in speed and both of its defenses, making Gengar fast enough to outspeed most threats, lock them in place, and take them out with ease. It is a very scary Pokemon. This is made all the more dangerous as Gengar's personality changes when it Mega Evolves. It loses all interest in opponents unless it sees them as prey. However, when it finds a target to attack, it will slip into another dimension and emerge to launch a surprise attack. Even its trainer isn't safe in this, as Gengar will try to take the lives of anyone that it finds, and is willing to curse their trainer on a whim. And following Gengar is one of the strongest Megas ever, surprisingly being Kangaskhan. This is a Pokemon that never really caused a stir in its base form. It has pretty middling stats across the board, though the Scrappy ability is pretty fun and allows it to hit ghost types. But things change when the Pokemon Mega Evolves. Interestingly, like Slowbro, this Pokemon doesn't actually experience the Mega Evolution itself. Instead, it is the baby in the pouch that Mega Evolves, allowing it to grow to the point that it can leave its mother's pouch and join her in battle. This is represented by Mega Kangaskhan's new ability, Parental Bond, causing the baby to attack with its mother and repeat the selected move to deal an additional 25% of its normal damage as a second hit. Now, 25% isn't too bad, I hear you say, but Focus Sashes now no longer matter. Fake Out suddenly hits twice, and attacks which have secondary effects like Body Slam and Crunch have a second chance to go off, and arguably more importantly, buffing moves like Power Up Punch suddenly become Swords Dance that also does damage. Luckily, Kangaskhan didn't get any insane buffs to their stats directly, only 30 to attack, 10 to speed, and 20 to everything else, but even so, this thing was a monster. Much like Kangaskhan, another Gen 1 Pokemon that fell to the wayside with time was Pinsir, who got a pretty fun Mega. This form gives them the flying type as well as their original bug, and allows it to easily lift massive enemies, pierce and shred them with their horns, and fly at a massive, which I get isn't slow, but I feel like when we bring up speed in the Pokedex, it's usually to say that it's a Pokemon that's as fast as a jet, right? Not an average minivan in a residential area. In this form though, Pinsir sprouts large yellow wings from its back, develops talon-like growths on its hands, and gets these crazy looking eyes, along with 30 points to attack, 20 to both defenses and speed, and 10 to special attack. This Pokemon is a bit strange to use though. Originally it has access to abilities like Moxie, so you kinda wanna switch it in, get a kill, and then get a stat buff before Mega Evolving, and if you can't find a smooth time to do that, it often falls a bit short unless you get a turn to make Swords Dance happen. Luckily, its Mega ability is pretty strong on its own. Aerolate, which turns normal type moves into flying types, giving it a stab bonus, and then adding another 30% buff on top of that, though this was lowered to 20% in Generation 7. Suddenly, Return hits like a truck, but more importantly, Quick Attack becomes a flying type priority move with a solid base power behind it. But even so, that was all you could really do with this Pokemon. It isn't exactly versatile, which makes it pretty easy to play around, and as a result, it falls into a category of Megas like Blastoise that just kinda fall flat. But from some of Gen 1's relics to one of the most iconic Pokemon ever, Gyarados. This Pokemon's Mega Evolution almost looks more like a giant shrimp than the sea serpent that it's known to be, though it does seem to be inspired by both a Leviathan and a mysterious Pokemon that Misty waves to in an episode called Enlighten Up from back in 2002. So Mega Gyarados becomes a quick nod to this seemingly forgotten form, which is pretty cool. Much like Gengar, Mega Evolving a Gyarados affects its brain, in this case only leaving the parts which make the Pokemon want to destroy and burn everything in sight. Not only that, but the stress from Mega Evolving is so painful that it angers the Pokemon even further and causes it to rampage. Even so, in this form, if it truly trusts its trainer, it can still follow their orders through some effort. But in exchange for this pain, Mega Gyarados gains the ability to shoot water from the holes on the sides of its body to propel itself at Mach speeds. And this is another one of these weird Pokemon where the Mega can sometimes feel lackluster. Like it's fine, but it just doesn't quite compete with the other big Megas or bring enough to the table to really justify losing the use of an item. Especially when normal Gyarados is such a beast as it is. Swapping the flying type for a dark type switches your immunity from ground to psychic, which can be okay, though objectively, ground is just more commonly used in attacks, and as a type in the series in general, though being able to swap immunities on the fly is pretty cool. Then there are its abilities. Normal Gyarados has Intimidate, which is one of the best abilities in the game, meaning you can swap it in, lower the opponent's attack, and then Mega Evolve to gain Mold Breaker instead, which is a fine enough ability that lets Gyarados bypass the opponent's abilities. On the other hand, Gyarados also has Moxie, which is a great sweeping option, and could set you up for a solid attack boost before Mega Evolving. So on paper, this has a lot going for it to make for a good Mega, but it just didn't work out that way. And speaking of which, in terms of stats, Gyarados gets 32 attack, defense, and special defense, and 10 in special attack, making it another Pokemon whose Pokedex mentions it getting faster, but who doesn't get any real speed stat boost. Like I said, overall it is a totally okay Mega. Next up we have Mega Aerodactyl, who in many ways feels sort of like Mega Beedrill. It is super fast and physically strong, while still being very frail and having an ability that boosts its damage. In this case, Aerodactyl actually picks up the exact same stat growth as Pinsir when Mega Evolving, 30 to attack, 20 to its defenses and speed, and 10 in special attack. And this is all supplemented with the Tough Claws ability that Mega Charizard X also had. Now, are you noticing a trend? Because it feels like just about everything Mega Aerodactyl offers is also offered by another Mega, which is never really a great sign. These are supposed to be unique Pokemon that really change how your team is built, and Mega Aerodactyl feels very much like a normal Aerodactyl that hits a little bit harder while also kind of just doing what other Megas already do. When it Mega Evolves, parts of Aerodactyl's body turn into stone, and its appearance becomes more similar to what it actually looked like prior to being fossilized, with jagged spikes all along its wings, tail, and head that are harder than diamond. Like Gyarados, Mega Evolving is so painful that it sets this Pokemon into a blind rage, causing it to attack anything in range. With that though, we have reached the final Pokemon for our Gen 1 section, Mewtwo, who like Charizard received two new forms, Mega Mewtwo X and Mega Mewtwo Y, with the first being physical and the second being special. On top of that, each of these Pokemon gain new abilities which involve statuses. Mewtwo X gains Steadfast, giving it speed whenever it is flinched, while Y gets Insomnia so that it can't be put to sleep. These aren't the flashiest abilities, but both are okay as both Fake Out and Sleep moves are fairly common. In its X form, Mewtwo generally gets more buff, with thick muscular pads on its forearms and its thighs, as well as a vest-like growth on its chest. It looks pretty gross, honestly. Its psychic power augments its muscles to the point that it has a grip strength of 1 ton and allows it to sprint 100 meters in just 2 seconds, and fittingly, it becomes a fighting type as well. This form gets a whopping 80 points in attack and 10 in both defenses, giving it the highest growth of any single stat among any Mega Pokemon, as well as giving it the highest attack stat of any Pokemon ever. Meanwhile, the Y form shrinks Mewtwo in size, shifts its horns forward, and has it develop a loop-like growth around its head. Not only that, but its tail also moves, and instead of coming out of the bottom of its body, it comes out of the back of its head. This all comes with a massive boost to its psychic abilities, allows it to crush a skyscraper with a single thought. This Pokemon gains 40 points to special attack and attack, 30 to special defense, 10 in speed, and then loses 20 points in defense, which coincides with its smaller body. The attack stat is pretty confusing here, however, even despite this, it still has the highest special attack stat of any Pokemon in the entire series by about 15 points. Obviously, both of these Pokemon are incredibly powerful, however, Mewtwo Y is just generally more versatile and I'd say pretty solidly more powerful. Like Charizard, this Pokemon already wanted to be a special attacker in general, and has plenty more options in line with that. Plus, being faster is always a good thing. Now, heading into our Gen 2 Megas, of which we have only 6. Of all of these, none is more iconic than Mega Ampharos, a majestic creature who gains a flowing head of wool and a fluffy tail filled with red gems. By Mega Evolving, Ampharos grows back all the wool that it stopped making when it evolved, but more importantly, it awakens a long-dormant dragon's blood in its cells, picking up the dragon typing as a result. This extra wool and these gems throughout its tail allow it to conduct electricity more powerfully, enhancing all of its powers. This is another Pokemon which got a small buff going into Generation 6, getting 10 points into its defense, and by Mega Evolving, it gets 50 more in special attack, 20 in defense, attack, and special defense, but loses 10 speed. One nice thing is that it gets Mold Breaker though, which allows it to bypass abilities like Lightning Rod, which is fine but doesn't come up super often. While this is definitely a cool Mega, it is another of that kind that suffers from kinda being one note. Dragon Pulse, some electric move, Power Gem, and some kind of setup move, and that's really all it has going for it. It just has the one set, really. Again, not to say it's bad, it's just not the strongest at all either. Following Ampharos is the insanely defensive Mega Steelix. It gains more jagged steel around its body and these light blue rings along each of its segments, but more iconically is the crystals and minerals that float around it and stick out of its body. This being a small nod to the Crystal Onyx episode from the anime. This Pokemon unfortunately retains the Sand Force ability when it Mega Evolves, which is highly conditional to say the least. But the disappointments with this Pokemon don't end there. When Mega Evolving, Mega Steelix gets 40 points to attack, 30 to defense, and 30 to special defense. But the thing is, even with this buff to its attack, it only goes up to 125, which is like where Pinsir was before Mega Evolving. It's okay, but it's nothing insane, and as for its defense, I mean, it was already at 200, and the 30 points certainly doesn't hurt, but at some point you're just kind of beating a dead horse. It doesn't need more defense than that. Shifting these to special defense or straight into attack would have been infinitely better, and it just kind of makes it so there's 30 wasted points when Mega Evolving. Alternatively, all the iridescent gems along its body could have also been a potential reason to maybe even make it a Steel Fairy type Pokemon rather than Steel Ground, which is a stretch, but could have been a cool or fun idea. As it stands though, there's no new ability, pretty irrelevant stat changes, and nothing really of note here, but at least it looks super cool. Another Steel type though is, yet again, one of my favorites, being Mega Scizor. The pincers at the end of this Pokemon's hand become large jaw-like structures that can rip through anything. Meanwhile, its body generally becomes sharper, and large black patches of armor appear around it, making it almost feel like a Mega Man boss in my opinion. But this comes at a cost. Mega Scizor has so much energy that floods into it that it can overflow, and if it spends too much time in battle, its body will even start to melt. Now, unlike Mega Steelix, where retaining the ability made it weaker, Mega Scizor gets to keep Technician, which is arguably the best potential ability it could have had. God, I love this Pokemon. Technician boosts the power of moves with 60 or less power by 50%. Bullet Punch suddenly has a base power of 60 before getting the stab bonus, for example. It's essentially similar to the Aerolate buff that Pinsir had that we already talked about, except it's more versatile by a long shot. Something particularly fun back then was running Pursuit on this Pokemon, meaning you could swap them into a weakened enemy, then threaten to kill them with a priority move, or if you think they're going to swap out of this to try and save the Pokemon, hit them with a stab, Technician boosted Pursuit to steal a kill anyways. It was absolutely diabolical. The big downside of this Pokemon is that it doesn't actually get many points into its attack when Mega Evolving, only getting 20 here. Instead, it becomes more defensive, with 40 points in defense, 20 in special defense, and then 10 in speed and special attack. This definitely makes it much more bulky, which is nice, but Scizor kinda wants to hit hard with priority moves to hopefully get a kill before the opponent can attack anyways. Luckily, it does get Swords Dance to mitigate this, but you'll need a free turn, which can feel kinda bad. Admittedly, you might just be better off running Life Orb or Choice Band, but the versatility offered by keeping access to all your moves and not slowly draining your health at least leaves an argument for using Mega Scizor. Plus, he just looks so cool. Keeping on the bug theme is Mega Heracross, one of the few Megas that rework how the Pokemon plays entirely, which I appreciate, even if it isn't the best. Normally, Heracross makes use of their Moxie ability with a Choice Scarf or Choice Band, or does something with Guts shenanigans, which are both okay and fine on their own, but Mega Heracross instead gets the Skill Link ability, making it so multi-hit moves always hit the most possible times. These are things Heracross would never have used in the past, so it definitely is interesting. They include Arm Thrust, Bullet Seed, Fury Attack, Pin Missile, and Rock Blast in their case. However, the big benefit of Skill Link is often that it can be used on fast Pokemon like Chinchino, in combination with a King's Rock to abuse flinch strats, which Mega Pinsir can't use as it needs to hold a Mega Stone, but at the very least it does let them bypass Focus Sashes. Mega Heracross gets 60 points into attack and 40 in defense. Weirdly, it trades 10 speed for 10 special defense as well, but this does kind of make sense as when you look at it, it is just a bulkier version of its former self. Even so, with this change, it has the second highest attack stat ever, just behind Mega Mewtwo X. And this makes sense. As I said, look at this thing's new body. It is thicker, stronger, its shell grows into a solid carapace, and its horn transforms into something sharper and more deadly. Mega Evolving even gives it so much strength that it can lift upwards of 60,000 pounds. But after it reverts to its normal form, it experiences terrible pain as a result of the extra strength it just had. Speaking of pain, let's take a look at Mega Houndoom, a Pokemon whose design I really like, but who also upsets me so much. Its horns become elongated and stick upwards, it grows a skull-like collar with spikes and tusks, it gains shackle-like rings around its forelegs, and its tail splits to look like a pitchfork, which looks objectively so cool. But like, how the hell is this thing not a Cerberus? The idea was so free, the redesign was easier than anything else they've done, and they missed it. Houndoom also loses a potential immunity when it Mega Evolves, switching the Flash Fire ability in exchange for Solar Power. Luckily, the fire immunity isn't exactly a problem, so that's fine. As for Solar Power, it boosts the Pokemon's special attack by 50% while in sunlight, but does cause them to lose a bit of health after each move. This would be okay, but it requires you to set up Sun to make it so that Houndoom even has an ability. And while the Mega form is bulkier than the original, it isn't like it's going to survive a turn if it tries to set up Sunny Day, meaning you need another dedicated Sun setter. Mega Houndoom gets 40 points in defense, 30 in special attack, 20 in speed, and 10 in special defense, which is solid enough. However, this power comes with a lot of pain. Notice how Mega Houndoom's claws are red, while the originals are white? Well, this isn't just a recolor. The Pokemon has such a high internal temperature when Mega Evolving that its claws and the tips of its tail become red hot, literally melting from its own heat and causing brutal pain for the Pokemon. Meanwhile, looking back, Ampharos got fluffy. Like, that's it? I would be so mad if I was Houndoom. The last Mega Pokemon for Generation 2 is Tyranitar. When Mega Evolving, this Pokemon's back splits open and forms a spiky new armor for it to battle in. It is so painful, though, that the Pokemon loses control and attacks everything in sight. Megatitar is an interesting Pokemon who, like Charizard Y, often acted as the core of a weather team. That's because it keeps its Sandstream ability, which notably gives Rock-type Pokemon like Tyranitar a 50% boost to their special defense, and can be used for chip damage or to break focus sashes. When Mega Evolving, Tyranitar gets 30 points in attack, 40 in defense, 20 in special defense, and 10 in speed, making it a bulky physical attacker, and in many ways everything that Mega Steelix wanted to be, especially with access to setup moves like Dragon Dance or supportive moves like Stealth Rock. Though like Mega Scizor, there's definitely an argument for just running a normal Tyranitar instead. Items like Assault Vest are great on Tyranitar, or Choice Band, Choice Scarf, Smooth Rock. It is actually such a versatile and flexible Pokemon that any version is solid enough to try, and that can almost be a hindrance in trying to justify using a Mega Tyranitar. Generation 3 gave us 22 new Megas, sort of, starting out with one for each of our starters. First up, we have Mega Sceptile, who like Ampharos picks up the Dragon typing when they Mega Evolve. On top of that, Sceptile's normally used ability, Unburden, wouldn't work as it can't exactly drop its Mega Stone, so instead it gets Lightning Rod, which logistically makes sense thanks to its new giant tail, but I do wish it was something a little bit more exciting, you know? Speaking of their tail though, Mega Sceptile's tail essentially becomes a large Christmas tree with a red spike as a topper, which it can fire at its enemies. They gain more red stripes across their body, several bulbs on their back, and jagged growths on their back as well as their wrists. It's basically a living Christmas tree. While its new typing does make it super weak to ice and adds in a dragon and fairy weakness, it removes the fire weakness and makes it immune to electric attacks thanks to its ability, as well as making it a great doubles partner for any flying or water Pokemon. When Mega Evolving, Sceptile gains 25 points to attack and speed, 10 to defense, and 40 to special attack. And also, totally unrelated, am I the only one who was confident that Sceptile was a physical attacker? I feel like I'm being gaslit, like its whole thing is using Leaf Blade. Who is a physical attacker though is Blaziken, a Pokemon who retains their speed boost ability to become an extremely powerful Mega. Mega Blaziken gets black accents along its torso and legs, its feathers form into an X rather than just shooting back from its head, and its two horns become one larger one instead. On top of all of that, it gets these cool ribbons of flames that jet from its wrists. When it transforms, it gains 40 points to attack, bringing it up to a massive 160, as well as 10 to both defenses and 20 to speed and special attack. This Pokemon could really abuse the speed boost ability to become a massive threat, especially if you throw on Protect. So much so that it's fairly comparable to powerhouses like Mega Kangaskhan and Mewtwo, which is why it ended up in Ubers almost immediately upon release. However, Mega Blaziken is still fairly frail, unlike our next Pokemon, Mega Swampert. This thing is the definition of swole. Its arms and back gain a massive amount of muscles, and its yellow pads and whiskers become a deep dark orange. But that size doesn't come with a drawback to its speed thanks to its Swift Swim ability, doubling Mega Swampert's speed in the rain. When Mega Evolving, Swampert gains 40 points to attack, 20 in each defense, and 10 to both special attack and speed. This is another of those Pokemon, like Houndoom, that do need a little bit of support. However, you can slot Swampert into either a Rain team or a Trick Room team pretty effectively. With its natural bulk and solid attack, it can become a really dangerous threat in either option. On to the Mega, which is my personal favorite shiny of all of them, being Mega Gardevoir. When Gardevoir Mega evolves, its dress puffs out to look more like a ball gown or wedding dress. It gains white gloves, the spike through its chest splits into two, and the horn on the side of its face changes shape. It is just a very pretty design in general, but add in the shiny, turning its dress black and the skin into that light blue, and it is just such a cool combination of colors. It's basically just shiny Umbreon, but elevated in every way. Gardevoir is an absolute special monster, gaining a 40-point buff to special attack and 22 speed, special defense, and attack for some reason. I guess it helps if you want to like throw in Shadow Sneak on there, but like don't, right? Like Pinsir, Mega Gardevoir gets an ability that changes the type of normal type moves before giving them a buff, this time being Pixelate, which makes them into fairy type attacks. This isn't super diverse in terms of options, but at least on Hyper Voice it makes a pretty powerful spread move that can ignore substitutes, and that can be pretty effective. Now onto a fantastically designed Mega, who is probably the one I've used least out of any of them. Mega Sableye turns the diamonds in this Pokemon's eyes into rubies, and then gives them another massive ruby to use as a shield. Fitting to this, the Pokemon gets the Magic Bounce ability. This basically lets Sableye reflect any non-damaging moves back at the opponent. From field hazards to status effects, everything is bounced off the gem. And along with that, Sableye gets a huge 50-point boost to both defenses, 10 to attack, and 20 to special attack in exchange for losing 30 speed because the ruby is pretty heavy. Now, a Pokemon gaining over 25% of their base stat total and a fantastic ability should make them way better, and that would be the case for just about any other Pokemon aside from Sableye. And that's because Sableye's base ability is Prankster, an ability that lets it move first when using a non-damaging move. Things like Will-O-Wisp, Toxic, Recover, Substitute, the list goes on. Throw on Leftovers, and this thing can be a massive pain to deal with despite its weak stats. But you can't do that if you are using a Mega Sableye. You lose Prankster and the ability to hold items just to make this a much weaker Pokemon overall as a result. On the exact opposite side of the spectrum though is Mawile, probably the Pokemon who received the biggest buff going into Generation 6. Firstly, it picked up the Fairy typing, which is a pretty big deal. Steel and Fairy is probably the strongest type combination in the game, only being weak to Ground and Fire, and being normally damaged by fighting Ghost, Steel, Water, and Electric, having 2 immunities, being Poison and Dragon, and then resisting every other type. 9 resistances and 2 immunities, 11 types down the drain against this thing. On top of that, like Gyarados, Mawile has Intimidate, meaning it weakens enemies when it enters, giving it a chance to set up safely. Now that's all before it even holds the Mega Stone, but when it does, we get Mega Mawile. Its body grows to look a bit less baby-like, and a second mouth grows from the back of its head. This Pokemon gains 20 points in attack and 40 in each defense. And that doesn't sound so bad, right? So it's a bit tankier, it still only has 105 attack, how strong could it be? Well, that's where the ability Huge Power comes in, doubling Mawile's attack stat. So you could basically say that Mega Evolving gives Mawile 80 defensive stats and 120 points in attack. It gets a bigger buff purely into its attack stat than any other Mega gets in total for Mega Evolving. Remember how I said Mewtwo X had the highest attack in the game at 190? Well, Mawile, with Huge Power, sits at 210. In comparison, other Pokemon with this ability include Azumarill, who has a base attack of 50, because it would be crazy to put this on a Pokemon with higher attack, and even when Diggersby got the ability, his attack was only 56. So we have the highest attack in the game on a fairly defensive Pokemon with the best typing in the game, who comes in and lowers the opponent's physical attack. How do we make this even better? We give it Swords Dance and Sucker Punch, with powerful stab moves like Iron Head and Play Rough. Hell, even throw on Power Up Punch if you want. This is a silly Pokemon, and probably the single strongest Mega Evolution in comparison to its base form. If not, it is the strongest non-legendary Mega in general, in my opinion. And then there is Mega Aggron, very in line with Mega Steelix, though probably better on average overall. This is one of the only Megas who actually lose a typing when Mega Evolving, going from a Steel Rock type to a pure Steel. Importantly, this removes 2 of their 4 times weaknesses. Not only that, but the new Filter ability makes it so that super effective moves used against Aggron are weaker, doing only 1.5 times damage rather than double. As a result of this, Aggron goes from being 2 times weak to water and 4 times weak to both fighting and ground, and having 8 resistances, to having 10 resistances and 3 weaknesses, being fighting, ground, and fire, which only do 1.5 times rather than 2. This is a pretty damn solid buff for this Pokemon. Notably, it does lose access to Stab for the Rock-type moves that it learns, but who cares, I guess? When Mega Evolving, Aggron's body becomes thicker, and so does its steel hide. Not only that, it becomes much more rounded, and gains a look similar to samurai armor, which again, objectively, pretty badass. That said, the stat change that it gets is similar to Steelix as well, bringing the new defense to 230, getting 30 to attack and 20 in special defense. This is once again just defensive overkill though, and I almost wish that the points given to defenses were swapped, but regardless, it at least feels better than Steelix to use. And interestingly, this new form also weighs about 100 extra pounds as well, making it a great choice to use a stab heavy slam. However, it also makes Mega Aggron weaker to low kick because of this weight, but again, who cares? Speaking of kicks, next we have Mega Medicham. Medicham? I don't know, actually. This Pokemon doesn't come up very often. Regardless, this form is tangentially based on Hindu myth, taking inspiration from Shiva by growing extra arm-like appendages from its back. Its head also changes shape as well to give it a more mystical appearance. Like Mega Mawile, this Pokemon gets an ability that doubles its attack stat, this time being Pure Power, which it retains from its base form. And you might think that means that Medicham is just as good as Mega Mawile. I mean, the Mega gets a 40-point buff to attack, basically bringing it up to the same point total as Mawile. However, there is a huge difference. Mawile only needed 20 points in attack, meaning it could dedicate more to its defenses, and it only put stats in its attack and defenses. Meanwhile, Medicham put 20 points into its speed, which is fine, that's acceptable, 20 points into special attack, which are effectively wasted, and 10 in each defense, making it much more frail in comparison to Mega Mawile. On top of that, Fighting and Psychic is just an inherently weaker type than Steel Fairy, arguably one of the worst types in the game. It only offers 2 resistances, those being Fighting and Rock, which aren't super common types. Like, they show up, but defensively this is just pretty terrible. What is cool though is that it has access to Fake Out, Bullet Punch, all of the elemental punches for coverage, High Jump Kick, Zen Headbutt. Like, the versatility on this thing is great, but the typing and the frailty really hold it back. Following Medicham, we have the first Mega that I personally built a team around, being Manectric. Its body transforms into having a lightning-shaped mane that covers its back. However, the energy it gains overwhelms Manectric, and it is constantly irritated the entire time it's in this form. Luckily, it picks up the Intimidate ability, which, as we've mentioned, is one of the best in the game. On top of that, its base ability is Lightning Rod, which means you can use it to absorb a hit that would have hurt your flying or water-type Pokemon when you switch it in before Mega Evolving it. I really like Megas on Pokemon like this who were never really used before. They don't need to be great, but they can give a real second breath of life into a Pokemon in a very cool way. When Manectric Mega Evolves, he gets 30 points in speed, making him the 6th fastest Mega of all, and allowing him to overcome most opponents, which is important because it basically wants to use Volt Switch every chance it gets to re-trigger Intimidate as often as possible. It also gets 30 points to special attack, making it hit decently hard, and 20 to each defense. It is a really solid set of buffs with no wasted stats. The biggest downfall for this Pokemon though is its move pool. Volt Switch was an auto-include, as was Protect, as you would need to get the speed boost before attacking, and then it got a bit iffy. An electric type move that didn't force you to switch out could be useful. Flamethrower is solid coverage, as is Hidden Power Ice. And that's it. Those were really all of the attacking options that this Pokemon had. It is very fun to use, but it was super linear and very limiting overall, which is kind of a shame. Another Pokemon which really made use of Protect to gain speed was Mega Sharpedo, the ace Pokemon for Team Aqua's Archie. This Pokemon gains yellow scars all across its body, and an elongated nose, which has several teeth that grow outwards as spine on each side of its face. If any of these are broken, they will recover quickly, which is kinda cool. Like many of the Megas so far, Sharpedo experiences intense pain and suffering in this form, causing it to lash out aggressively. Regularly, Sharpedo's biggest strength is its speed boost ability, so like I said, you want to send them in, Protect to get speed boost, and then Mega Evolve on the following turn, losing the speed boost ability in exchange for Strong Jaw. This boosts biting type attacks by 50%, which is fitting for a shark. In doing this protect and then mega evolving strategy, you essentially get a free Dragon Dance, which is pretty cool. That said, Sharpedo only has access to Bite, Crunch, Ice, Poison, and Psychic Fangs, which isn't terrible, but it would be nice if it at least got access to Thunder Fang and Fire Fang as well. On top of that, Sharpedo doesn't really get a big buff to its attack, probably to keep this all in check, but that also acts to limit you. It only gets 20 points to its physical attack, which is kind of its biggest and most important feature. Then we get 15 points to special attack, 10 to speed, 30 to defense, and 25 to special defense. It feels like this thing doesn't really get enough anywhere to really feel a difference, and being a bit bulkier is fine, but Sharpedo wants to one-shot things, not fight battles of attrition. It's just unfortunate overall. Even the design is just kinda goofy in my opinion, so we're gonna just move ahead. Their counterpart, on the other hand, is a Pokemon I really enjoy just all around, being Mega Camerupt, the ace Pokemon for Team Magma's Maxi, who I actually love the Mega design for. The humps on Camerupt's back combine into one massive volcano, and fur extends down to give its body more protection. This is reflected in the 30 points it gets in each defense, as well as the 40 it gets to its special attack, making it hit pretty hard, especially in tandem with its new Sheer Force ability, which removes the secondary effects of its attacks in order to boost their power by 30%. Camerupt's relevant special moves affected by this include Ancient Power, Earth Power, Fire Blast, Flamethrower, Heat Wave, Lava Plume, Flash Cannon, and Mud Bomb. They're not particularly a huge, diverse group of attacks, but you're probably using Earth Power and Lava Plume anyways, so it's probably fine. That said, it does have plenty of physical options, and with an attack of 120, it is still definitely a weaker physical attacker, but it's honestly a reasonable option to explore. This is largely because when Mega Evolving, Camerupt loses 20 points in its speed and gains them in attack, which normally is bad, but with a base speed of 40 anyways, it's not like it was ever going to outspeed anything even in its base form. And so, redistributing those points to allow for versatility is pretty cool, actually. Plus, it makes them one of the fastest Pokemon if used on a Trick Room team, which is kind of awesome. On top of their offensive moves, Camerupt also has great supporting and setup moves. Amnesia, Yawn, Curse, Stealth Rock, Will-O-Wisp, Helping Hand, all 3 weather setup moves, and Roar. This is a surprisingly versatile Pokemon with a lot to offer. That said, low speed and a 4 times weakness to water are kind of large obstacles for this thing to overcome, and I wouldn't really say it does it well. Following Camerupt, we have Altaria, who basically becomes a big cotton ball when it Mega Evolves, along with gaining a long flowing tail as well, which is just kind of pretty. This is a really interesting Pokemon, as it is one of the few examples of a Pokemon completely changing typings from their base form to their final form, with Swablu being a normal flying, Altaria dropping normal for dragon, and Mega Altaria dropping flying for fairy, which is kinda neat. That said, obviously our weaknesses and resistances pretty drastically change when we do this, though probably for the better, removing our only 4 times weakness, which had been to ice, as well as our weaknesses to rock and dragon. Instead, we are now weak to poison and steel in their place. We also lose an immunity to ground in exchange for an immunity to dragon, and resisting electric and dark as a benefit. So overall, this is a solid new typing. Along with this is an ability that we've already talked about with Mega Gardevoir being Pixelate. But where Altaria differs from other Pixelate users, being Mega Gardevoir and Sylveon, is that they can be used as a physical attacker or a special attacker, as after they Mega Evolve, they have 110 in each of their offensive stats. Notable options include Body Slam, Return, Giga Impact, Hyper Beam, Double Edge, Hyper Voice, Uproar, Facade, and Headbutt, which is way more options than Gardevoir had for Pixelate, as they could just really use Hyper Voice. Adding to this, Altaria gets moves like Cotton Guard, Perish Song, Tailwind, Sing, Will-O-Wisp, Haze, and Dragon Dance, allowing it to be used as support or as a sweeper. And that is great because Mega Altaria basically acts as a blank canvas. When Mega Evolving, their attack, defense, and special attack are all brought to 110, meaning you really can't go wrong with however you build this thing. It is just the ultimate average Mega, which is always going to be okay. But we are finally at one of the best Mega designs, in my opinion, Mega Banette. a form which has its body splitting open through zippers that reveal the creature hiding inside. Literally, it is flooded with so much energy that its cursed power spills out of itself. This thing is straight out of a Tim Burton animated movie, and I love it. Not only that, but it gets Prankster as its new ability, which, remember how I said Mega Sableye loses Prankster so no one uses that Pokemon? Well, this Mega gets Prankster. That said, the move pool is pretty different from Sableye, and it can't use a held item like Leftovers to abuse things like Protect, Substitute, and other stall moves. Banette gets access to moves like Calm Mind, Cotton Guard, Curse, Double Team, Endure, Pain Split, Substitute, Swagger, Taunt, Thunderwave, Toxic, Trick Room, Will-O-Wisp, and most importantly, Destiny Bond. Prankster, Destiny Bond. And this is the only Pokemon who can do that. There are so many options with this thing, however, a lot of them are admittedly less than useful on Banette, as they are a bit too frail to be taking a turn to use these moves. It does get 20 points to its special defense and 10 to its defense, but that doesn't really change much. It also gets 10 to speed and special attack, but more importantly, Banette picks up 50 in attack, bringing them up to 165. This might be the Mega that I played around with the most. It can be super fun, but I will be the first to admit that a frail, slow glass cannon is rarely going to work. That said, Prankster Destiny Bond is still really funny and worth trying. On to Serena's Mega, Absol. Absol is another of those objectively cool Pokemon, but it only gets cooler when Mega Evolving. Its horn grows, it gets wings, and its hair covers half of its face. That said, the Pokédex explains that they aren't true wings and Absol can't fly with them, they are purely aesthetic. In this form, it takes the energy it receives from Mega Evolving and transforms it into an aura that it can use to intimidate opponents into running away from it. Mega Absol's coolest feature though is the new ability Magic Bounce, which is the same one that Mega Sableye had. This is a really fantastic utility ability in a lot of ways, and makes it feel like a physical Espeon, which is another Pokemon I love to use. Speaking of stats though, Mega Absol receives 20 to attack, 40 to speed, and for some reason, 40 points to special attack. Which, like, man, what are we doing here? What a way to ruin a Mega's potential. Genuinely, this might be the single worst stat change from any Mega in the series. Sure, it does get solid special options, but even after getting half of their Mega stat buff going into special attack, it is still nearly 40 points lower than his physical attack. So like, what is the point of this? I need to move on. I'm getting heated. I will go on a very long rant if this continues. Mega Glalie, a perfect choice to cool down with. Mega Evolving floods this Pokemon with so much energy that its jaw literally breaks, which is somehow still less sad than what happened to Mega Absol. I'm not done with... Okay, we're done. When Mega Glalie's jaw breaks, a constant blizzard comes out of it, and its mouth can't be closed. The Pokédex says that it is able to freeze its prey solid, however, because it can't close its mouth, it is unable to actually eat anything that it hunts for. Along with this, Glalie gets thick black ice that coats the bottom of its face, and a sharp horn that sprouts from its forehead. Like we've seen a few times, Glalie picks up the ability to swap normal type moves into its own type, this time being Refrigerate, which makes them ice, and gives them the typical boost. Like Mega Altaria, you can kind of do whatever you want with it at this point, as Glalie gets 40 points to both of its offensive stats and 20 to speed. This allows you to make use of moves like Explosion, Hyper Voice, Body Slam, and Hyper Beam with buffs from their ability. But even so, this thing is just very meh, and there isn't much to them, unfortunately. But the same can't be said for our next Mega, Salamence, a Pokemon nicknamed the Blood-Soaked Crescent. In this form, the stress from Mega Evolving brutally reshapes their wings and forces them into one large wing, which it uses to fly right through its targets and slice them in half. Not only that, but by pulling its arms into its shell straps, it can become even more aerodynamic and move even faster. This thing is just rad. It has a more sleek design than the original, which ended up being so beloved that they brought it back for the design of Roaring Moon. When it comes to its abilities, this is actually very similar to Gyarados, with its base form even having the same options of Intimidate and Moxie. However, In this case, instead of getting Mold Breaker, Salamence picks up Aerialate, just like Mega Pinsir did. This allows him to turn moves like Thrash, Body Slam, Facade, Headbutt, and Return into flying type moves, which is pretty solid. Speaking of buffs though, Salamence gets a measly 10 points in both attack and special attack, which is pretty low, though this is definitely not a Pokemon that needs help sweeping, so I think that's fine, honestly. Obviously, if they wanted to stack up its attack, that'd be crazy, but they could have done it. I'm okay having a fair Mega. Mostly fair Mega, anyways. It also picks up 20 points in speed, 10 in special defense, and 50 in defense for some reason? I didn't know this thing was like that. It is super strange, just like Mega Absol. However, at least defense is always a relevant stat, and we aren't just funneling stats into nothing. Throw on Dragon Dance, its base and Mega abilities, and just general great stats and move pool, and this thing is a monster no matter how you look at it. Our other pseudo-legendary for Generation 3 also got a Mega, being Metagross. Speaking of which, if you want to learn more about the story and lore of pseudo-Pokemon, check out our video on all of them after this one. Mega Metagross gets off his legs and begins floating with each of his limbs positioned forward, with powerful claws at the end of each of them. The X on its face also becomes more pronounced, and it grows a horn on its chin which it uses to impale its prey that it manages to catch. It's said that Mega Metagross's attacks are so brutal that people will cover their eyes to avoid seeing it. Its intelligence is also raised in this form, even beyond a normal Metagross's, and if pushed into a corner, it will bind its limbs onto its attacker in order to self-destruct. Making Metagross even stronger though is its new ability, Tough Claws, making it the third Mega to have this ability so far. On top of that, it gets 40 points into speed, 20 in both defenses, and 10 in both offenses. Altogether, this makes Metagross much bulkier, much faster, 30% more powerful thanks to its ability. On to actual legendaries though, starting with Latios and Latias. These two get nearly identical Mega forms, with their blue and red parts being turned purple. Latios retains his red eyes, while Latias's stay yellow. Latios also has a slightly larger body and head, and their wingtips will go in opposite directions, but otherwise, they are essentially identical physically. Neither of these Pokemon get new abilities, each keeping Levitate as well, which is fine. And a lot of people really don't like them in general, as they essentially feel like two of the exact same Pokemon, but let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I do think it's a little bit lazy, but I get the idea they were going for. Notably, these are also the Pokemon used to soar in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which does at least make them functional in-game. In terms of stats, Latias gets 20 special defense, 30 special attack, 30 defense, and 20 attack. Ironically not touching their speed, despite that being what these Pokemon are known for in the lore. Otherwise, it just kinda gets small bonuses across the board. Latios gets much more noticeable but less useful changes, with 40 points in attack for some reason, 30 in special attack, 20 in defense, and 10 in special defense. It is always super disappointing when a Mega's biggest stat change is in a stat that they don't use. Now, before moving on to Mega Ray, we need to cover Primal Reversion, which, yes, technically isn't Mega Evolution, but I'm not making a whole separate video for these two, and it's the only chance I have to talk about them, so you're just gonna have to deal with it. Rather than evolving with Mega Stones, Kyogre and Groudon react to the red and blue orbs. These allow them to activate Primal Reversion, returning them to their strongest forms from the past. This process is similar to Mega Evolution, however the source of the energy is different. The Project Azoth files explain that Mega Evolution stems from the energy of people and Pokemon, while Primal Reversion instead is natural energy that the Pokemon harnesses to take into their body. In their primal forms, each Pokemon glows with bright yellow energy and becomes significantly larger in size. Each primal form also elevates the normal abilities of these Pokemon. Kyogre's typical Drizzle becomes Primordial Sea, an enhanced rain condition that nullifies all fire attacks. Meanwhile, Groudon's Drought becomes Desolate Land, nullifying water attacks instead. Notably, while most weather conditions do last about 5 turns, these each can be extended beyond those 5 turns until the Pokemon who caused the effect leaves the field, or until the condition is overwritten and replaced. In terms of stats, the changes are fairly similar. In general, Kyogre and Groudon have mirrored physical and special stats. and so the primal buffs also follow this as well. Kyogre gets 50 points to attack, 30 to special attack, and 20 to special defense. Unfortunately, this means it has 50 wasted stats, but hey, Primordial Sea is kinda nuts, so that's fine. Groudon has similar problems with 50 to special attack, but it does get 30 to attack and 20 to defense, which is also pretty okay. Also, just a quick side note, I love their primal shinies. Typically, shiny Groudon is bright yellow and Kyogre is pink, but in their primal forms, they're both black with accents of their original shiny colors, which I think is kind of a nice touch. Notably, there's also Primal Dialga in Mystery Dungeon, which came out 6 years prior to these new forms for Kyogre and Groudon. However, despite having an identical name, they are completely unrelated to the primal reversion phenomenon, which is kind of confusing, but I get it. With that said, on to the other major legendary for Gen 3, Rayquaza. Their mega form is just fantastic. Large black patches along its body with glowing golden orbs and strands of energy extending from the back. Its head also drastically changes shape, and the Pokemon becomes about twice the size of its original form. Notably, Rayquaza is the only Pokemon who can Mega Evolve without a Mega Stone. Instead, it simply needs to know the move Dragon Ascent and not have a Z Crystal attached to it. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire's Delta episode, we ride a Mega Rayquaza into space and use Dragon Ascent to destroy Deoxys' meteor and save Hoenn. This different requirement for Mega Evolution is due to an organ in the Pokemon's body called the Mikado organ, which was described to us by a Devincorp scientist. In this new form, Rayquaza's airlock ability becomes Delta Stream, which eliminates all weaknesses of flying-type Pokemon, making them take neutral damage from ice, rock, and electric moves. However, this doesn't affect things like Stealth Rock, which aren't technically attacks. In their Mega form, Rayquaza gets 30 points to each offensive stat, 20 to speed, and 10 to each defense, bringing it to the insane base stat total of 780, and ironically giving it the same attack and special attack as Deoxys' attack form. Now, on to Generation 4's Megas, of which there are only 5. First up, Lopunny, who when they Mega Evolve, looks like they are in a 1980s aerobic outfit. They even have fur that now looks like leg warmers and scrunchies. It is, in fact, a choice that was made for this Pokemon's design. In this form, Lopunny will swing their ears like whips to attack their enemy, and develops a very aggressive personality. That said, functionally, this is a very cool Mega actually. Lopunny picks up the fighting type on top of its original normal typing, and gets the new ability Scrappy, which allows them to hit ghost type Pokemon with normal and fighting type attacks, meaning that Fake Out and High Jump Kick just became a lot more reliable and safe. Alongside that, Lopunny gets 60 points in attack, 30 in speed, and 10 in defense, which is pretty much as good as you can ask for when it comes to stat changes for this Pokemon. Which is more than I can say about Garchomp. For a Mega of Garchomp, you would assume that this would be an excellent Mega like Mega Salamence or Metagross, who are, other pseudos. However, yeesh. When Mega Evolving, the excess energy melts its arms and wings and turns them into giant scythe blades. However, this is so painful that it sends the Pokemon into a blind rage, causing it to slice through everything around it. Along with their scythe hands, Garchomp gets a Jay Leno-like chin and more spikes along its body. It is a pretty solid mix of, hey, that's cool, and oh, why did they do that? Then there's its ability, Sand Force, which, to be useful, needs you to have another Pokemon set up Sandstorm. It is the same problem that we saw with Mega Steelix and Houndoom, effectively being a useless ability. In this form, Garchomp does gain 40 points to attack, 20 to defense, and 10 to special defense, which is all great, but then we get into some issues. It loses 10 speed, and then gets 40 points to special attack. Firstly, losing speed for a sweeper Pokemon is rough at the best of times, but especially when dropping below that 100 speed threshold. But to then get so many points into special attack, which is effectively wasted, it is just kinda brutal. On top of all of that, Garchomp is another Pokemon which typically gets a lot from holding items like Choice Scarf, Choice Band, Rocky Helmet, Life Orb, Lumberry, and many other options. Losing those can also be rough. That isn't to say that Mega Garchomp is useless though, it is fine. But it definitely could be better, and it feels a lot like Mega Gyarados in that way. Following that, we have one of the poster boys for Mega Evolution being Mega Lucario. And damn, this Pokemon looks cool. Black lines run across its body where Aura and Mega Evolution energy mix together. The ends of its limbs get red accents, its fur extends into a fluffy tail and coat, and its hair becomes long and wavy. Lucario's Aura gets a huge buff in this form, and its combat instincts completely overwhelm it to the point that it will attack its enemies without ever holding back until they are completely destroyed. But, more importantly and functional to us in the game, is that it picks up the adaptability ability, making all stab moves do 2 times the damage rather than 1.5, basically making all steel and fighting type moves super effective when they would be neutral, before any actual type advantages come into play. And that's pretty nice because Lucario can be either a physical or special attacker with a ton of versatility. It gains 35 points in physical attack, 25 in special, 18 in defense, and 22 in speed. This lets you do quite a lot with this Pokemon, having great setup moves like Swords Dance, Bulk Up, Calm Mind, and Nasty Plot, priority moves like Extreme Speed and Bullet Punch, and a ton of attack diversity. It is a super fun Pokemon with plenty of versatility. And then there's Mega Abomasnow. When it Mega Evolves, it turns into this. It's a lot to look at, and honestly, for over a decade, I haven't been able to decide if I really hate this design or kinda like it. This Pokemon retains the Snow Warning ability, which is fine, I guess, but I think it's definitely a Mega which could have benefited from a stronger ability, as it's just not that good. That said, they did put in some extra effort when looking to change its stats. Like Camerupt, Abomasnow loses a chunk of speed so that its other stats can get bigger buffs. In this case, it loses 30 speed and gains 40 in both attacks, 30 in defense, and 20 in special defense. That is a ton of extra stats, but as we saw with Glalie, splitting focus on the attack and special attack could sometimes hold the Pokemon back. If those stats had been funneled into something with more bulk, it could have made a much bigger impact for this Pokemon. As for our last Gen 4 Mega, Gallade, this Pokemon gets a rad cape and a Yu-Gi-Oh! Style dual disc. He's pretty cool. It does pick up the ability Inner Focus, which prevents flinching, which is fine. However, in later generations, base Gallade will get the ability Sharpness, which boosts slashing type moves' powers. And I think this would have been a nice thing to see on Mega Gallade as well, but being able to ignore fake outs is also kind of fine too, I guess. That said, solid stat changes for this Pokemon, 40 in attack, 30 to both defense and speed, and generally that is some of the best stat changes for any Megas in my opinion. Literally, it is exactly what Gallade is looking for. From there, we have just 2 Megas left, one from Generation 5 and one from Generation 6. As well as speculation for the ZA Megas that we've received so far. From Gen 5, we got Audino, for some reason. It gets a much more fairy-like appearance and a white cloak, which is all fitting as it picks up the fairy typing when it Mega Evolves, as well as the Healer ability. This is a doubles-based ability which gives you a 30% chance to cure the status conditions of adjacent Pokemon, which is okay in double battles, I guess. It is fairly fitting though, as Audino is obviously a support Pokemon, but the stat changes it receives actually help this quite a bit, gaining 40 to both defenses and 20 to special attack. That said, the biggest problem with Mega Audino is that it isn't any other Mega, meaning that you can't have them on your team if you try to use Mega Audino. And I just can't imagine a world where you're building your team and you think, wait, Mega Audino, that'd be perfect right now. Now yet another fairy-type Mega is Generation 6's Diancie, who gets a magical girl transformation, gaining a long skirt of crystal, flowing fabric, and a more detailed dress, as well as a heart-shaped crystal on its forehead. It is a very pretty design. When Mega Evolving, Diancie picks up the ability Magic Bounce, just like Absol and Sableye did, and again, it's totally fine and a decent supportive and defensive ability, though obviously needing a turn to actually turn the ability on through Mega Evolution is just worse on average than having a Pokemon which has that ability naturally. Mega Diancie gets a massive 60 points in attack, special attack, and speed, which you might notice is more than 100, which is because they lose 40 points in each defense. Luckily, it can pick up those stats again when Diancie uses its signature move, Diamond Storm, which has a 50% chance to raise Diancie's defense by 1 stage in Generation 6, or by 2 stages in Generation 7. This is another Pokemon that drastically changes their playstyle when Mega Evolving, and I'm always a huge fan of that. As for the ZA Megas so far, we don't really know much about them, however we have seen 3 so far, being Dragonite, Victreebell, and Hawlucha. So, what am I expecting to see from them? Well, starting with Dragonite, they pick up large wings on the top of their heads and smaller feathers on their ankles, similar to the Greek god Hermes. They also have a weather-controlling gem on their tail, similar to what Dragonair has. For stats, I would expect to see 30 points to attack and defense, and 20 in special attack and special defense. It doesn't exactly look like it would be getting much faster, especially considering that it is nearly twice as heavy as it was before. As for abilities, Psych! ZA will not have abilities, which is super unfortunate, but for fun, I think that Serene Grace would fit this new design and could be pretty exciting to use on Dragonite. Mega Victreebell becomes a big ol' plant sack that almost looks like a water skin. This has gotta be getting some defensive stats, which is gonna be weird since normally Victreebell's defenses are pretty booty. At the same time, their speed is sure as hell getting cut. So let's drop 30 points from speed and bump up both defenses by 50, attack by 20, and special attack by 10. This should make it decently bulky and won't give it a crazy attack stat, but will allow it to hit pretty well. I also kinda get stench, gooey, or liquid oob vibes from this Pokemon, which could be fun abilities to play around with. Finally, we have Mega Hawlucha leaning even further into his luchador aesthetics. That said, the new color scheme reminds me of the Quetzalcoatl, which also fits the idea of Dragonite having been based on Hermes, who is another god. But Victreebell doesn't seem to match this theme that the other two do, so I'm not sure if that's actually what they're going to be going for. I would want Hawlucha to get 40 points in attack, 30 in defense, 20 in special defense, and 10 in special attack. I think this little dude looks much bulkier in this form, so I would want him to be a tankier Pokemon. That said, this Pokemon also looks like it's more about showboating in this form, so maybe an ability like Moxie that rewards it for taking out other Pokemon would be kind of fitting. But with that, we have covered all 50 Megas so far, as well as taking a guess at what the new Megas will be like. Which Mega is your favorite? For me, my top 5 include Banette, Slowbro, Beedrill, Scizor, and Gardevoir. Let me know yours in the comments down below. You can also leave a like and subscribe for more videos in the future. We will have our video on these ZA Megas out as soon as possible, so following the channel is the best way to make sure it gets recommended to you. If you're looking for more Pokemon content though, we have full videos on legendaries, mythicals, pseudo-legendaries, and even the evolutions. You can check out our Pokemon playlist to watch them all now. With that said, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.